Aaron's free to come through. I'm Irene from Scotland. I'm the Scotland team manager. And Aaron and I were supposed to arrange all this between us, exactly what we were doing online, except that I've been having a work crisis. So he's doing it and I'm helping him. That's exactly the wrong way in which you would approach an adjudication speech. Please don't say, I haven't done this before. You're probably not going to be giving the speech, at least to start off with. There were one or two people on the list who've terribly experienced judges, but not at World Schools. But anyway, yeah, yes, right, okay. But if you have an opportunity to do a speech, then and your chair thinks that would be good, that's absolutely fine. Please don't say, this is my first time. As Aaron says, exuding an air of absolute confidence and pleasure at being there, and enjoyment at helping these young people to develop themselves orally is absolutely the thing that we wish to do. There isn't really lots of point in me just waffling at you for no particular reason. I take it everyone's read, for example, the Stockley document and all that stuff that you've had. Yeah. Right? The Stockley document sound familiar? Yes. I really have no idea whether I'm preaching entirely to the absolutely converted or whether we've got probably one or two absolute newbies. But if you've got all that stuff in your mind, remember particularly, absolutely, that what you're looking for is. Sorry, I'm trying to be sort of inclusive. And would you like to come? I think there is one. Are you keeping that seat for someone? No. Would you like to come forward? I'm just warbling friendlily at the moment here, and there are a couple of seats here, just because the aircon's making a little bit of a noise. Are you okay? Is everybody else fine? I was just being welcoming, so you know. Finish your sentence. Grab chair. Okay, here. Which was that sentence? Where was that sentence going? But you've read the document and you've got the stuff in your mind. But generally speaking, well, you're not going to start. You're not going to start quoting little bits of sentences at people. You're going to give them a big, broad brush thing to begin with. And one thing that you absolutely, really mustn't do, and I'm sure I don't need to tell any of this, is don't make personal remarks about any one team member from the floor. That's what comes when they come in a huddle round with you afterwards. You give the main reasons why the team has won and why the losing team has lost, but you absolutely don't say, well, you know, it was going fine until the third op stood up and made a mess of the summary, whatever. You just don't say that. You might tend to as Aaron was saying, obviously we want the teams to develop, particularly earlier on and so on. There's this teacher, those of you that are teachers, there's this thing back called two stars and a wish. Is that a phrase that anybody's come across? It's modern sort of jargon that, you know, you tell them, that was nice, and that was really good. Now, how's about if you did such and such? And if you do it that way around, hopefully nobody's going to burst into tears.
Yes.
Okay.
The other phrase I've often heard is the praise sandwich. You know, so you have
well,
here's a good thing,
isn't it?
Same thing. Except the order is a bit different.
Okay.
Praise, and then the criticism in the middle, and then the praise is the bread of the sandwich, I suppose.
It's easier to swallow that way.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. With bits of bread. Yes. Did anyone have questions? You know, that you'd like us to answer? Yeah. And maybe we should write all of those out and then get through them. Yeah. Yes.
Sure. I just wanted to clarify something because I've done a lot of judging before, but not in this style.
Yeah.
If the kids are, if you think that they're sort of equivalent on content and strategy, can you decide the round on style?
Yep. All right. Great question. Can a round be decided on style? What else?
Is there an explicit priority between content and strategy and style, I guess?
Okay. Anything else? Yeah.
How many points do you take off when the content is wrong?
Okay. All right. Are you sure you're all shadow? Yes.
What happens if you see the chief judge and suddenly he does make a personal remark? I've seen that one. Suddenly someone who was supposed to be with much more knowledgeable and suddenly says, well, why on earth didn't you think of 1, 2, and 3 and so on and so on, so because
right.
his background, his particular background.
Right.
So what happens then? Do you sort of like intervene and say, well, or do you just keep quiet and let the chief judge and then afterwards, or do you try to do something as, you know, judge member of the panel?
What do you do? Yeah. Great. Anything else?
Yeah. How do you mark a situation correctly where a team brings a very bad argument, but the other team doesn't rebut it at all?
Bad argument, no rebuttal. Right?
Yes.
Sort of related to that, where is that emphasis on making a decision for yourself about an argument, or waiting for the other team to point it out?
Exactly.
Okay, that's similar.
Yeah, it's the same. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, and then you. Yeah.
Can debates swing on reply speeches, and what is the? I mean, to what extent can the low POI column affect decisions? Because in close margins, that can be swing on. So can you swing on those two issues, or does it have to be the substantive speeches?
Okay.
The other thing is.
Hang on. Sorry. So is this related?
No, I don't think so.
Hang on. If it's a separate question, we'll come to it. Yeah, Jessica.
What sort of timing breakdown are you looking for in constructive and rebuttal in each speech, and how strict is that breakdown?
All right. Yes.
How do we deal with definition debates? Is there any possibility that
God in heaven, I hope we don't have any of them.
that the front wins? Or
Oh, we will. I know. Well, no. If the motions committee has done its work, we really shouldn't have. Okay. Definitional debates. Great. What else?
Mine was, is it the first speaker who does the reply speech, or the second, or can they switch out?
Okay. Right. So.
Sometimes I see the second speaker do the reply speech, and I've always thought it was first.
Right. Okay.
One or two. Okay.
Yeah. It's one or two, so that one's an easy one to get away from. It's the first or second. Yeah, we're done. Right, you want to go for lunch? You wish. Right. Okay. Should we just take it from the top? Do you want to start? Okay, we'll have a go. And I gather, I'm getting the sense that some of you have ideas as well. So chip in along the way.
Okay. Well, style. Yes. I mean, it's got 40 marks. That's something that people perhaps find different about world schools, that where some of us are accustomed to very heavily content-orientated speeches in which that's what matters. But then if you think about it, if you're judging in your own country, heavily content-orientated speeches, everybody is speaking in the same language. And by language, I don't necessarily mean just English, but the variety of English and the nuances and the jargon and the general the banter that goes on. Now, this is different because banter and jargon and jokes and accents, as were mentioned earlier, and so on, have to be compatible with the other team. You have to create a debate, you have to make it a level playing field. Each team, in fact, has to think about creating a debate involving the other team, that they are engaging with one another in a fair fashion, in order that a resolution of the content of the motion will be achieved at the end. And therefore, it is very important that you give them credit for doing that, and that you don't in any way get influenced by their accent, but you do get influenced by their means of, with that accent and with their normal style of talking, engaging with the audience and achieving one of the main principles of debating, which is in fact persuasion. You know, did you persuade the audience that what you were saying was valid and defeated the other team's arguments? And therefore, that's a very important, I think, very important factor of world schools, in that it's part of the business that we can, in fact, have this wonderful tournament with 30-odd teams from all across, everywhere, engaging with one another, because they have to work at the level, that level of engagement being susceptible of connecting. Yes.
Follow up.
Regarding the accent, which is not taken with you, I had once it happened to me that with a very difficult accent, I didn't understand what the person said. What happens then? Because you suddenly miss a phrase or something. What do you do then? What happens then?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
Difficult.
they have to have worked on their English enough that it can engage.
Yep.
I mean, it is in English.
Yeah.
Well, yes, I've listened to debates. Fortunately, the one I can think of, both teams' command of English was a little bit fragile. And so the outcome of the debate didn't, in that case, actually hinge on it. But yeah, if they can't make themselves understood, then you're going to have to mark them down.
Yes. And I think what's important to mention there is, rather than immediately say, I didn't understand your accent, I think it's much more important is to just say, I don't think your point came across clearly. That is a much more region-neutral way of expressing that idea. Yeah. So my advice would be just don't bring accents into things at all. Even if you know at the back of your mind that that was a problem, you know then you better go sit around teams at lunchtime and dinner time and get yourself used to the different accents that are at play here. And that takes time, I understand. I often find that even coming back to world schools, for me, after a year away, the first 2 debates, I can feel my head pounding after that because you're listening to such a high level of argumentation that you just don't get at national competitions. And that takes some acclimatization. So don't worry about it, it happens. But don't tell a team that, because the point there is not that it was the accent that was the problem, it's that the way in which it was communicated wasn't as understandable as it needed to be. And then they might tell you, oh, but what I meant to say was this. And they'll say it much more slowly and perhaps more clearly.
You could use words like speed and clarity.
That's how you should
rather
phrase
than
it.
accent.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then you can say that's what you need.
That's
to
what you
do
needed to
with
say.
Yes,
your-
absolutely.
Yeah.
But some,
So remember that the responsibility is on the teams to make you understand what they are saying. You don't have to force the logic for them. I think you're going there, Debbie. Yeah.
Yes.
Sometimes debaters will give you time to process what they're saying, and it might not be a flaw, it might be a strength.
Absolutely.
So we have to make sure we understand that they're not doing it because it's a language problem, but to give you a chance to process what they're saying.
That's a really good point, actually. I mean, this notion of pauses, right? I sometimes ask teams, do you breathe? Because they just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And so there's no full stop or comma anywhere, and they go on, and there's no time to register. And a pause can be very powerful just to give the judge time to get that last bit of note-taking done. So that's nothing to penalize people for, absolutely. Yeah.
I have another question. What do you do with a team that either doesn't define as a prop or doesn't present arguments? Normally, like teams that are here for the first time.
Okay. Okay. Let's come to that in a bit. Any other quick thing on style? I think Irene answered that most comprehensively.
Having come from policy debate, I did notice something in the notes that referenced that there's a limit on speed, and I assume that it's the one that you would apply as part of style points.
Yes,
There's no
speed would go under there. I mean, and speed is really, are you slow enough to be comprehensible without boring people to death? That's what it is. It's comprehension and persuasion at the same time.
I was thinking more of the reverse. It's usually too fast.
Yeah, oh no, absolutely, absolutely, yeah. What I meant was a good speed is one where you're slow enough and yet persuasive. But it's entirely possible for it to be too fast. And you are perfectly within your rights to say to a team, you know, it took a lot of effort to follow what you were saying because you were speaking very quickly. It might help you to slow down. You might not repeat yourself so many times, and then the point gets made much more powerfully. That, I think, is constructive advice. But what you don't want to say, and I've had people say this, you know, and when I debated in '97, I've had people come up and say, oh, you know, I'm an ESL judge, and I can't follow you Singaporeans because you speak so quickly. That I don't think is, it's a perfectly valid way, it's a valid point. We do speak quickly. But I think the way in which it needed to be phrased was not so much, I'm an ESL judge, but just, I didn't understand you. You know, ESL, EFL, E whatever L. I didn't understand you, and I'm the judge. You need to make me understand. So that's an important thing to remember. Don't phrase things in those ways, because you give the teams ammunition to come back at you and say, you weren't competent, why are you even judging us?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that comes back to where I came in at the beginning, saying you have to create a debate. You have to make the playing field level in terms of communicative abilities in order that the arguments may clash nicely at the intellectual level that we're looking for. And so saying, well, you know, you have to make allowances for me and you're talking too fast and I don't like your nationality and whatever, these things are just not happening.
The other thing I read about was whether people use cards or whether they use paper.
Yeah.
And also in front of the podium and behind the podium. And what about people who pace? Because some people, that's all
As long
part-
as it doesn't distract.
Right.
You know, if what they're doing is
Yes.
this, then of course that's
If you get really
Yeah.
irritated by them, then tell them that they could improve their style by not raging up and down like a caged lion.
Yeah. And even something as simple as hand gestures, someone just keeps doing this all the time,
Yes.
is distracting. Yeah. Okay. Other questions?
Cool.
Yeah. Excellent. Priority between content style and strategy. Well, I mean, the mark breakdown is 40, 40, and 20, and that's what you're working on them. Any of these can be the deciding factor in a debate. In some cases, you will have teams that are superior on all fronts. In other cases, you will have a team that, you know, the content is not so great, but stylistically and strategically work together much better, and they can win a debate. I think the big thing that these 2 points are related, because when we say that style can decide a debate, that is not to say that style must decide a debate. So the occurrences of a team winning because it had okay content but great style should occur just about as often as a team losing because it had okay content and not so okay style. You see what I mean? Those things should average up. But the thing is, it can happen. And it has before. Judges have come up and said one team had superior content and arguments, but just didn't present it in quite as persuasive a way as the other team did. And that team did better on style. Yeah.
So when, my biggest problem with that is all else equal, if one team has slightly stronger style and one team has slightly stronger content, is there a priority between the two?
Well, you then have to decide which of those magnitudes is greater. Whose content or style is
So
a
there
little
really
bit better.
is no priority.
No, there is no priority.
Okay.
You know,
That's
and
when you go out of the sorry,
no, go on.
That's when you go out of the room and say, well, what did you give it? And you've got a two-man split.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
And then you make that a positive thing,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
You go back, you say to the team, well, you know, it was really close. It was so close, but it was a split. And here's what.
But here's why.
I remember the first time I tipped up as an adjudicator, I was terribly nervous, and I came out and discovered I'd split, and I thought, oh, I got it wrong, you know, they're going to send me home, and so on. Whereas by last year, I was going, but last year, I was going saying, oh, great, good, that's a split, that's fine, I'm pleased about that, because that will make the losing team feel better, because actually they really didn't lose by very much.
Yeah. And I guess the heart of that is to say that that's why we're here. You know, if this was as simple as a precise scientific method, then a computer could do the judging. But it isn't as simple as that, and it requires subjective weighing up of different things. And we all weigh things up differently. It happens. Yeah. As long as you can explain why you weigh things up differently.
I mean, look at the results for finals. It's a bit blowing trumpet. Last year's final was the first one that I can remember that was actually 9-0.
9-0, yeah.
Yeah, finals are always split, but they weren't last year.
Fair enough.
And guess who
Yeah,
was
yeah,
in last
exactly.
year's
How did this
final?
work out?
Us.
I wasn't there. Yes.
This is in relation to the content style strategy.
Yep.
Thing. So do you fill up your score sheet at the end of the debate or during the debate? Because then you have to adjust and then it looks
Okay.
really messy.
I should have said this earlier, but never mind. This applies, I guess, more to you. Those guys will know most of this. The score sheets are done in triplicate. So when you fill out the top, you're actually filling out 2 carbon copies below that as well. And those will get given to the teams. There are it's just numbers. There's no room for any written comments at all. So
Don't write on them.
yes, don't write. Don't have them underneath your foolscap pad and then scribble and then realize, oh no, all my notes. Stupid child. So thank you for bringing that up because it's led us to this. So don't do that. Keep it separate. My advice would actually be have a spare sheet of paper somewhere, do a draft and then just score them. And different people do it differently. Some people will have a separate score sheet. Other people who've been doing it long enough might just do, they'll split their sheets up into 3 and it'll be prop 1, prop 2, and prop 3. Then they'll do all their notes, and at the end of it, they'll just decide, okay, 29, 29, 13, whatever. And then that's their score. They know what it is. So this is legitimate as well. And then later on, once you've adjusted, you can transfer it to the score sheet.
Some of us who are unbelievably geeky and turn up with score sheets.
Oh, wow.
That's really geeky.
That's it. This is, I mean, I'm so geeky, I actually got the prep rounds typed on some of them.
No! Well, I know. You see, this is why we pick people to be on the CAP. They bring resources with them.
Bit geeky. Everybody's got, I mean, I've actually got a file at home. I decided not to bring it. You'll have noticed something about a Wiley sheet for sorting out POIs. Everybody's got their own way of doing things. This is a way that happens to suit me. And it simply saves sitting there drawing lines on bits of paper, in that I've got prop 1, prop 2, prop 3, and reply. And at the bottom of each one, I've got style, content, strategy, right? I've got a little box for them to add up in, right? And then down here, for each one, I've got 3 boxes, so that at the end of the debate, I can say to them, right, you took a point from that person, but none from there. Or I can say to the other side, during the course of that speech, you did not get off your backside once. Right? And in fact, if I've got 2 blanks here, then I'm going to be saying, well, you know, you actually weren't offering, because I can see quite clearly from the wee boxes. Now, you might have your own wee boxes. Other people put them in little boxes down here. Other people have them across there. Everybody's got their own way that their own brain works. Some people are very clever and can just do it on a blank bit of paper. I'm not that clever. So I like to have this sitting there so that I've got a pretty clear record, I think, when I come out. And it is useful if you're giving individual feedback to teams afterwards, that you could say, well, look, you know, how's about a few more POIs, or in fact, you really got up a bit too often. Yeah. And then from that box, if I put, in the box, I put a little mark if they offered and were refused, and I put a tick if they offered and it was taken. And then from the tick, in a different colour of ink, or with a highlighter or something, or maybe in pen and pencil, I can draw a line from that tick to a little circle in the body of the notes that says, this is what that person said. Now, other people have a tidier way of doing that, and I've seen people with their own homemade source sheets in which they've actually got a separate little box for POIs. You might want to do that. Yeah. But, you know, it might help if you just, you know, you've got your yellow pad. Before you go to the debate, just decide how you think you'd like to record stuff. And then you could just draw it out before you go. You know, sit with a ruler and a pen in your room, and then you don't need to be scribbling when you get there. And then that avoids, as Aaron has said, the cardinal sin of don't, whatever you do, write anything at all on the mark sheets except the marks. And it would be ever so much more helpful to us on the CAP when we're inputting the data, if we've got a nice as tidy as you can make it mark sheet with just the marks, because you've done them all on your bit, you've made them add up at the bottom, you've absolutely made sure that the way that you've given it, and when you've written at the bottom of your sheet, and the debate was won by, because you'll be asked to do that, it actually accords with the marks, and your marks add up, and say that. Do all that on your own scruffy bit of paper, and then at the end of the debate, just quietly copy it into your sheet, check the addition, hand it over, and leave the room.
This seemed like a good time to just
give
them
sorry,
out.
I don't know if we were in this order.
No, really weren't.
Yeah,
it's fine. I had no order. I'm just giving them to you now because you'll need them to judge the buy round later.
Right, so you
might as well have a look at them now, so you know what.
Well, if you can find a photocopier, I've got...
I was just going to say Irene.
Copyright it now!
I've got enough for me. I've got all the preliminary rounds with heads already typed in, and I've got enough for me to do what I sort of anticipate doing. If you can find a copier, I don't have enough copies to give you all one of whatever unless I can get a copy or two. But if anybody can find a copier, come and ask me and get a sheet.
It's in the business centre.
You know,
there's a big copier.
There's a big copier.
The other way is...
We'll look into that. I mean, I'm not saying that this is the only way to do it at all, but it's our way, and after you've run mine and think, oh, stupid woman, why'd you do it that way? The next year you'll come with your own sheet, done the way you want it, provided you've got a teenage son to do all the work for you.
And you can draw, these can be drawn as well. It really is just line paper, and it's very helpful. Just one other thing I wanted to stress is that, to mention.
I'll see if I can get some copies of that.
Irene said there are individual ways of doing it, so I'll just share how I do this. Not because hers is right and mine is wrong, or any of them is wrong. It's only right for you, isn't it? No one else can read my notes, but I can, and that's what matters. I take these notes as I go along, and then I often, just because I like to keep track not only of how many points were made and given, but when they were made and given. So I will just write at the side 1, 2, 3. If the first, second, or third speaker gave a point in relation to that bit of content that I just wrote about. And then if it gets taken, I'll circle it and scribble at the side what they wrote. And this helps me because sometimes you'll find that 3, 1, 2, 1, 2 are all offering around the same clump of points. And that's useful for a team to know as well. You were all offering at this point in the speech, but then there was this period of great desert-like emptiness where no one said anything, and that's not useful either. So it's my way, because I like having everything right in front of me. And there's no right or wrong with it. You just need to find a system that helps you to record that information. Okay? Sorry, before we do that, this doesn't actually answer your question. You got excited. What was your question?
I mean, it kind of did. It's just a matter of looking messy on paper because you seem really confused. If you filled up all this, scores first, right?
Yeah.
Then you cancel everything and carbon copies and then you submit.
Yes, please don't. With these carbon copies, you've seen them now. Please don't write on them until you are absolutely sure what you want to put on them. Okay?
Yeah, sorry. Let's ask about the prioritization between individual performance and team performance. A lot of times you have individual speakers who are, very sophisticated in their argument and whatnot, but in terms of the team argumentation, they are inconsistent or stuff like that. So you can't really reflect that accurately in the score sheet. So how do you prioritize between consistency and the sophistication of their argumentation?
Okay, hang on. Let me just take this other question as well.
Oh no, it was just a small remark that some of you might be used to giving low point wins, where a team can win without actually having more points. So somehow to remind people that's not done.
Absolutely, it does not happen in this style. The team that wins must have more points, even if it's half a point more. Yeah. Okay. Now that's your question. It is an important one. The categories are not just for an individual. It is how well they fit into a team as well. So for instance, if my first prop stands up and promises, and I'm second prop, they've said I'm going to say something, and then I give this brilliant, rousing speech on something completely different, then I may get a decent style mark. But I'm not going to get very much for content because I didn't say what they said I would say, and I will not get good marks for strategy because the team cohesion isn't there. So you are marking for team cohesion in each of the speeches. Yeah.
On both content and strategy.
And style. Harder for style, I suppose. Style is the most individual of the lot, I think. Yeah, but much more for content and strategy. Right. Yes.
Would you then also mark down strategy for the person who said their teammate would say something and then they didn't? But I find that often will happen in a POI. So that issue is actually covered in the second speaker's speech.
Right.
And then it isn't. Well, maybe then that was the strategy of the first speaker that was off, not the second speaker, because he was just saying that to get out of answering the question.
But as a team cohesively, shouldn't that second speaker be working?
The team should say it, yeah.
They're working.
So I would dock it off the second speaker.
I think I would leave the first one, because otherwise you're retrospectively marking them. I would take it off the second one.
Yeah.
And if he feels his teammates dumped him in it, well, tough. They can sort it out themselves after.
Good, I'm glad I asked that.
They can, have a brawl or something.
Yeah.
Up to them. But Anything else on this particular issue? Okay. What do you do when content is wrong? And this is related to the second, to number 4, which is what you do when a judge says things. Should a judge actually say, you should have brought up all of these other things? My personal view, and I don't know if you agree with this, but I suspect you will, is I don't take anything as right or wrong unless the other team has proven to me that it is right or wrong. I mean, unless they tell me the sun rises in the west or something like that. But the motions in this competition will not require that sort of argument. So I think we're okay. I think. So I tend to wait. And of course, if they say something that is clearly a made-up statistic and the whole audience bursts out laughing, you may not, you don't have to penalize them for it. They will already be penalizing themselves by turning bright red because they realize, oh dear, I've been found out. And then the other team, if they've got any cow sense at all, will stand up and say, you're clearly lying. This is wrong for all these reasons. Okay, but I would wait to have it pointed out. Also, if content is clearly wrong and someone doesn't point it out, then that's bad strategy for the other team as well.
So bring it up in the feedback, but you don't penalize them because it's the other team's job to have discovered that and dealt with it.
Yes.
And if you're looking at a debate in which that happens, then the overall marks are probably going to be lower. I mean, I would agree with Aaron in that you're not going to, you shouldn't ever be saying, well, actually, I've got a master's in international relations and I know that, whatever. That's not right at all. But on the other hand, if a team, I think, if they happen to, I mean, they probably won't, but if they say something that's obviously, clearly, massively wrong, then you are going to drop it a bit, even if you give them the win. because the other lot don't pick it up. But you're thinking, oh, well, come on, your average intelligent person knows that, and you have got that wrong. Would you agree with that?
And I think that should be in the feedback, so in the feedback, you need to let them know on the individual feedback, you know, this didn't quite, so watch your
Yes,
stats.
it depends on the nature of the error. I mean, if it's something that ought to be known by your average intelligent reader of The Economist, such as we all are, then yes, refer to it. If it's something on which you require specialist knowledge and they've got it wrong, if the other lot didn't challenge it, they get away with it.
And often a good way to phrase it is to say, you know, I happen to know this, and I know this for, you know, because of my profession outside the debate, and I didn't penalize you for it, and you were very lucky that the other team didn't catch you out.
Exactly.
You know, then you make it about them. It's always about the
So
debate.
be very careful when you're bringing forward facts or whatever it is, you know.
Exactly, and you should make that clarification. This didn't decide the debate, but it would have been so much better if you brought up some of these things.
And then I also let the other team know, you know, you need to make sure when they're bringing points out, if you're on it, and even if you're not too sure, challenge it, at least challenge it.
Exactly. Yes.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify something. Is our standard that we're expecting of the debaters the average reasonable reader of The Economist then? No, I'm not. I just want to be clear. Like, is that the kind of knowledge base we're expecting?
Yes,
So for the same for the impromptu debates?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Just have to be where you get most of them.
Yes. David, right?
Yeah, David. So can you use specialized knowledge, or?
Can you as a judge?
I mean, the debaters, sorry.
They have whatever they've researched.
They've researched it upside down and got it right. That's brilliant. Yeah, they probably ought to have for the prepared debates. They've been doing nothing but for the last month, so yeah.
So they can use whatever information, but we do not bring information in. And I'll mention more of this later on in terms.
I mean, the financial institution, they probably know more than we do.
Oh, clearly, yeah. Which is why the phrasing of the feedback, you know, and that sounding confident that I mentioned earlier is crucial. If you show one sliver of weakness, they will go for your jugular. They really will.
Yes, that's right. And if you say, I don't really know anything much about this, so just don't say that.
Yes. Yeah.
So basically, we're talking about when it goes to deciding if they've made mistakes or gotten something wrong, you can lower the points, but no more than the other team if the other team didn't catch them on it. Is that basically the rule that we're talking about? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And here I think to answer your question as well, right? You were talking about what the chief judge had said before. Now there's two things to say there. One is, I think if they were phrasing it the way we had, which is, here's what I think you could have brought up, and this didn't decide the debate, but going forward you might want to think about these sorts of arguments. That for me is constructive feedback. It's fine. But if you find, he didn't say, right. So if that's not what was said, and you find that, I'm the second and third person on a panel, but I'm not comfortable with what my chief judge has done, then again, come and let the CAP know. Tell us about those reservations, and we will look into those things.
You don't say anything there to add anything to the kid.
No, I don't think you should, and this is very important.
Because you're lowering that.
Don't undermine a panel, a member. Okay? Never do that. We respect each other's dissent. The majority of people will respect the dissenters, but we don't undermine each other. Never ever say, well, to be honest, that other judge was on crack. I have no idea what they were doing. This really should have been a unanimous win, but somehow it became a 2-1, but whatever. Sorry, guys. Don't do that, okay? Your feedback is yours, not feedback on another judge. Yeah.
But you could potentially, when the kids come up to you individually afterwards, to say, well, I personally think you did this really well, without discrediting the other judge. So that
that's right.
So that you bolstered them up without.
Yes. Absolutely.
Can you also let the kids know that you were the dissenting vote?
Pardon?
Can you also let the kids
know? They will know because they will see the score sheets.
They'll get the balance the next day anyway. But again, it's a question of phraseology, isn't it? You say, well, the strengths that I found in your debate were such that I gave it to you, whereas the strengths that the other people found were perhaps different. And so you want to think about that. And then that kind of gets you out of it.
That's right.
I often sorry, finish your.
No, I said no, it does get you.
Yes, yeah, it does. And one other thing I find useful sometimes is to actually tell teams, I gave this debate to you. You might actually, and I'll give you all the feedback, but talk to the dissenting judge because they're the ones who will give you the most constructive feedback to improve in the next round, and that helps them think, a bit more positively about what's going on.
Because the whole goal is each round to get better.
And better.
Yes.
Exactly. So I mean that tends to be how I try and phrase the feedback.
Yes, and I mean that brings us back to what I was saying earlier, that I try and make, if you have a split decision, I try and make that a positive thing. And say, look, this is really good because actually it was very, very close and you can learn from this.
Okay, I think we can move on to this issue of bad argument and if there's no rebuttal. Any thoughts?
Well, does that not sort of, in a way, reflect the content is wrong? It's the same thing, it's just a different aspect of the structure. So I think we've kind of more or less said all that.
So we just basically, I mean, if it's a bad argument and there's no rebuttal, then
you penalize the team that made the bad argument.
And the overall marks are lower.
That's right.
I mean, the way you can think about it is that's not a good argument in terms of how it was explicated. So the content mark for that speaker is not going to be great.
That's right.
But it's not going to be awful either because the other team didn't point out the problem. And then the other team gets a not so good strategy mark because they didn't identify the right issue. Yeah, so you absolutely agree with that. Can a debate swing in reply? Good question. Replies summarize the debates that have gone on before. So can they change the outcome of a debate?
Well, if the debate can be decided based on half a point, then they definitely should be.
Yeah, I mean, you may find that if you're keeping a record of marks, if you're vaguely totaling it up as you're going along as you may be, you might well find you've got them neck and neck.
Yeah.
You know, and the quality of that bringing together, how succinctly, how persuasive, how well did they highlight the main points of clash and not wittering on about the minor things and so on. Yeah, jolly well can, I think.
And I found sometimes replies can clarify.
Yes.
Well, that's what they're supposed to do. Yeah, absolutely.
Rephrase what's said in them.
Indeed. Yes, very much so.
So there are no hard and fast rules on this one. It is eminently possible.
So just to clarify about replies again, so like if you are the prop reply and you come after a rebuttal speaker, the op third, are you allowed to slide in some rebuttals? I mean,
no new information.
You're not, right?
Not new information. Although we also need to remember that poor prop reply is making a 4-minute speech after 12 continuous minutes of opposition speech time. Because the speaking order is first prop, op, and then the op goes with its reply first, and then the prop. So if the op has not played fair and brought up some, not new arguments, but new examples maybe, in their third speech, then the prop has to say, has to defend, but also should say, this is in response to the stuff you brought up late in your case.
Yes.
And make that clear. So if you do that, it's absolutely clear to the judges. And you can tell them that kind of thing, that they need to make those distinctions clear. Hopefully it won't happen too often.
Well, they can. They shouldn't be.
It's a higher level here.
We hope. Okay. Right, so swinging on reply. Swinging on a POI column, again, if it's a really close debate, it's theoretically possible.
Yeah, well, as this gentleman quite correctly said, if it goes on half marks, and it does.
Otherwise, why have them?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But don't feel obliged to use the POI column. I mean, in fact, thinking of all the ballot papers we shuffled through last year in our venture, there were in fact very few instances of people thinking that POIs were so substantively different, so qualitatively different from the rest of the speech, that they felt the need to highlight that. So don't think, oh gosh, I haven't used that. If you haven't used that, that's absolutely cool. We don't need to input it and stuff.
Better not to use it than to misuse it.
Yes.
This just brought it up for me. I've often found a lot of people arguing about the ideal style of a reply, so that the reply style should be really different from the constructive speeches. And I would just like to hear from you guys, how you would define that. Like the strategy, I guess it's really a strategy. So it's a summary debate.
Are you thinking really how you structure a reply speech?
Yeah. So how much you talk about the themes of the debate versus the details of it versus if you're replying to something new that came up, sort of.
The timing.
Not the timing, but the style of it. Is there really a good style and a bad style of how to do a reply? I've just heard so much discussion about it that I wanted to know if there sort of was a world school way of
I don't think there is.
Okay.
I think our perplexed looks at one another too.
Yeah, that basically answered my question.
Yes, there's no ideal nirvana state for them to try and aspire to become. Although there'll be you'll find as you go along, you'll see some people who really have it worked out well for themselves. They find some people do very good sequential replies, some do it by theme, and any of those will work depending on the dynamic of the debate, and those are judgment calls that they have to make, which is what makes it a really demanding but also fun style.
And I mean, you get, people stand stand up in the final last year and start talking about the lifts and the hotel to introduce their speech.
Right.
Yeah. I'm one.
I'm satisfied. Yeah.
It's your team.
Yeah. Cracked a joke about the lifts in the middle of abolishing the nuclear proliferation treaty. But he tied it in very cleverly to what he was going to say next. Sorry.
This is why we don't judge our own countries.
This would be more fun if it had actually been there at the time. But,
yes, it would have been actually,
you do what fits, and it fitted because it made everyone laugh, and then on he went.
Quite easy tension.
Yeah.
Humor is good.
Humor's very good. Yeah.
Humour's good if you're clever enough to manage humour for an international audience.
Yeah.
It's a very difficult one.
Yeah.
So I mean, one would generally advise one's team not to go out cracking jokes. Absolutely not.
Yeah. And
but
not
if
at other
you're
people's
lucky
expense.
enough,
Definitely.
no, absolutely not. Not sarcasm, not at all.
Yeah.
But if you're lucky enough to perceive something that's genuinely internationally funny, and that is relevant, and the occasions on which that will happen are very, very few, then.
And if we come across a speech that is demoralizing or anything that we feel that, do we dock marks for that, or do we just make that as part of our conduct?
Well, I think that for me that would come under it didn't persuade me very well.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then but do you let be
Well, then I would
careful on your style, make sure that when you're delivering that you're delivering to the audience in the room and not.
Yes, and again, that's not something you would say from the floor. That's something you would say in your little huddle. Yes, afterwards.
And
sorry, go on.
it's the same with metaphors and idioms and colloquialisms and stuff.
Sometimes you will watch debates really where someone says something and they expect it to be this universal language that everyone understands. And the other people just looking at them going, what are you talking about? And then they try and deal with this in rebuttal but clearly have no idea. And I've often said to teams, I mean, first of all, you say to the team, if you really aren't sure about stuff, you can actually just say this hasn't been clear, rather than try and deal with it and get it wrong. And a team that tries to use those sorts of metaphors needs to be aware of that as well. If they see another team struggling and misunderstanding, I would think it's good for them to come up and say, actually what we meant was this, and then really get it very clear for the judges, because we need to remember the judges are going to be from 3 different countries to the 2 teams. So there's going to be a lot of different languages and vocabularies at work there. Okay. Timing on arguments and rebuttals for different speeches. Is there a perfect one? No, but there are.
Well, there's stuff in the document about 3 minutes, 3 to 4 minutes stuff. You've read that. We don't need to tell you all that.
Yeah, and that's it. But of course, I mean, a lot will depend on. Look, if a first prop stands up and says very little, and sits down after 3 minutes, then you're not going to expect the first op to have
a lot of
2 minutes of rebuttal and 6 minutes of substantive. Exactly. And those things we have to make allowances for as we go along. Whereas if you get a very extensive first proposition speech, then you might find that the first op has to spend 4 minutes on rebuttal to really clarify things.
On every point that was brought up, right? And you should be able to, or at least touch each point.
Regarding time, I've always had this question. What happens if a team just does not make the time? Does that automatically make them lose?
No, but it will affect their content and their strategy marks, because there isn't much content there that can be evaluated. And in terms of strategy, you're meant to be speaking, at least until that 7-minute bell. So in terms of strategy, I would say there is a problem.
What if there's an oops and they get to 6 minutes only? And
then the strategy mark is not going to be perfect.
I've seen, before I became a judge, I used to observe and I heard that when a team doesn't make it, then they've automatically lost.
No, it depends how bad the other one are.
The other team might be 5 minutes.
Yeah.
You can talk about it and not say anything.
Yes,
exactly.
Yes.
They might have 8 minutes of nothing.
Yeah, that's right. So it's not. Okay.
So it's not necessary.
It's really hard for a new judge to be able to decipher between the rhetoric and the truth. It's like, wow, this guy really blew me away, but what did he say?
Yeah, that's great speakers.
So you have to really focus.
Absolutely. You do have to focus, and that's where the thundering head comes in after the debate.
Sorry, I just want to clarify something about the time. Are the kids then aiming to just make it to the 7-minute bell, or like what? Like, do you think that an 8-minute speech that's like the time's been filled is better than a 7-minute, or?
Yeah. Everything else equal, an 8-minute speech is better than a 7.
Yes.
But I would start really penalizing on strategy if they didn't meet 7. For me.
Yeah, I mean, the best teams will have their speeches spot on.
Yes.
You know, 8 minutes 10 or something.
Yeah.
They just will.
And at 7:15 they will start saying things like, and so what have I shown you today? They start narrating the debate.
Yes. Is there a hard and fast rule with regard whether the rebuttals have to come before the substantive? So you can just move it around or fuse it.
They can, I mean, depending on how they decide to do it, yeah.
Okay, sure.
And often there will be reasons for it. Some might decide to do both at the same time, especially if their substantive case is actually a rebuttal to an argument that just got made. But they need to say that that's what they're doing. They can't assume that you understand it. They should tell you, I'm about to now interweave my rebuttal with my
Yes,
consent.
absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
That's a set of phrases.
They shouldn't leave things to the judge's imagination. And we'll talk about that.
Well, there's supposed to flow chart for you, right? So
Yeah,
you know
if you're looking for
Yes.
vocabulary to give them feedback, then talking about flags and signposts, things
Yeah.
of structure are things that you absolutely want to be saying, because if the team's lost, that's very probably quite a lot of what you're going to be telling them about.
Yep. Yeah, flagging, signposts.
Yes,
Yeah.
very much so. I mean, especially at the rate that some of these people do manage to deliver, you as a judge are going to find it really quite difficult to keep up. And you really want to have 1.2.3, and then you want to tick off that they actually said 1.2.3. I don't need to tell you that, you know that already.
Okay. This is also, I think, is useful for teams if they don't do it to tell them to start. Because, and the way in which we phrase this, I often think is to say, look, your job is to persuade me. And part of persuasion is to really demarcate your arguments in such a clear way that it becomes easy for me to understand. Of course, I have to play my part. I have to listen. I have to be vaguely intelligent to understand the complexity of the arguments. And they should take those things as a given. Sometimes it's not necessarily true, but never mind. We will not have this problem this year, right? But I think phrasing it in terms of to tell them, you make it easy for the judges to understand you. And then they realize that this helps them, because once they do it, the structure mark goes up, you know, they get rewarded for it. And I think that is the best way to incentivize getting them to get this done. Anything else? So we did timing. Definitional debates. Hooray. Had to happen. I suppose we have to draw the damn flow chart. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to do that. We hope those won't happen. And I do mean it when I say that the people who set the motions spent many agonizing email discussions over various time zones trying to make sure those don't happen. But they can, and therefore we should know about them. It's very important, so Prop 1 will define, right? There is a set way in which these challenges need to be done. And if they're not done that way, then teams need to be penalized for it. A challenge must come from first opposition. If first opposition does not challenge, then 2 and 3 cannot challenge either. It is a fundamental strategic error if the next two come up and challenge the definition. So Op 1 has to challenge, and then they have to do what we call an even if. So they have to say, we are challenging, here is our alternative definition, and then they have to say, here's why it's superior. And then they have to also say, but even if we accept your definition, here's why you are still wrong. In other words, you are judging two debates. Right? You are judging.
Sorry, repeat.
Okay. So Prop has made a set of definitions, right? Which Op doesn't agree with. Opposition must challenge in first opposition. If they don't, they are assumed to have accepted the definition, and they cannot challenge subsequently. Okay? But they must. So that's the first thing they have to do. The second thing they must do is they must do an even if argument. So they have to say, we've told you our new definition, and we've told you why we think it's superior. But even if we accept your definition, you are still wrong for all these reasons. In other words, they cannot just ignore the Prop case. They have to say we're challenging it, but we're also going to debate what you have given us. So in other words, what I was trying to get at is that you end up having two debates. The debate as defined by the Prop, and the debate as defined by the Op, which is awful. And you You must tell those teams to never try their very best not to do that.
Could then the second prop get up and say, we challenge?
Well, no. So once that happens, there is a very structured way this needs to be done. Prop 2 has to defend his or her team's definition. And they then have to say, but even if we accept your challenge, you are still wrong because.
And then
by which time you've given up.
Yes.
It's like,
oh,
both got
God's
6.
sake. Yeah.
Have you ever had judges walk out of the room?
No,
No,
you
don't do that.
And that will not be done. Yeah. Yes.
I know this is ridiculous and technical, but if the first op, okay, I guess I have 2 questions in one. If the first op challenges the definition when, for a reasonable person, the proposition definition was okay, even if the op definition might be better, they shouldn't be challenging if the first prop definition is okay. Is that correct?
Yes.
Like if it's okay, but they have a better one, that's a bad challenge.
Yes.
Okay. If the prop team then says our definition was okay because blah blah blah, are they still compelled to go through the even if debate? And obviously that's ideal, but if they don't, can they still win? Not can they still, I know everything depends on all the little things, but if a prop team then says, no, that's ridiculous, that's a silly challenge, this was okay for all these reasons, here's our case, and then they ignore the challenge after that, can that be okay?
No.
Okay.
You have to, the challenge must be
You still
sustained.
have to continue to even.
Well, yeah, they made it.
So the op team can win that debate if they continue to even it. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's really something, because I realized that we might have skipped the even if.
Yeah, oh no, you have to have the even if. Right through. Prop 3, prop reply, op 3, and op reply. Everybody is arguing and even ifing all over the place. Which actually, this is frustrating. It's an awful kind of debate to judge, but actually it's not that hard. Because someone somewhere will forget to do something. Exactly. Yes, you have to keep up, but it is them. They have to make those decisions.
And on the third speech, you didn't do the even if, so that was
You might actually want a coloured pencil that follows the thread of the argument, like a snake down an age.
Did you bring coloured pencils for everybody?
Not for me.
They sell them in the store.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad you brought this up because it is quite crucial. Yeah, Steve.
So this definitional challenge is not a regular part of opposition strategy in this format.
No.
So debate has to be foreclosed by the government's understanding the motion for this to even come up.
That's right.
A debate is impossible, therefore we challenge.
A legitimate challenge is to a definition.
All right, so only tautologies or okay. Okay.
Yeah. Are we all okay with those terms, truisms and tautologies? Yeah.
But if it's a bad challenge, do you still have to even if the whole thing?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And see that's the thing. By making it this crucial, you really make them think, can I sustain this challenge across 8 speeches? And if they don't think so, then op 1 better think 2 or 3 times before they try and do this challenge.
Yeah. So if you get one of those, then you give them the feedback, then say, don't ever do that again.
Yes.
I've actually had where ops gotten up and said, don't necessarily agree with the definition, but we'll debate it anyways.
That's
and so that
okay.
kind of
That's
opens
an
up the judge's mind to whether or not it's a clear definition and really gets you started.
Yeah, that's fine.
And that's fine, and even if it isn't necessary because they didn't actually challenge it.
No, that's not a challenge.
Yeah.
If they say we'll debate it, they've accepted it. They've whined about it a little bit and said, we're not sure this is fair, but fine. We'll do it.
That's kind of puts the sympathy or their hope, I guess, from the judge's sympathy to go to their side because it wasn't clear.
But it only works if the judge was already thinking that.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, provided it's a legitimate, I mean, you can't use that as a tactic.
So there is a risk.
Yeah, of course.
No, the one I'm thinking of, it was fair.
Right, and that's fine. So this is not to say that we tell them never to challenge, because sometimes, teams will define things in really quite silly ways. And those are legitimate challenges. But the idea is be circumspect about it, be judicious. Do not challenge all over the place, because that just creates terrible experiences for all of us. Yeah.
So if neither side, even if, then the marks will be low for both.
Yes.
Either one can win anyway.
Yes.
It's not just the opposition.
So it could be strategic to challenge.
It could, yeah. It could, but
assuming the other side drops.
I often say to teams, look, win because you argue better, not because you define the debate a certain way.
Yeah.
You know, it's such a Pyrrhic way to
win.
I know you said that you can only challenge if it's a truism or tautology, but can an op team also challenge if the prop model or definition sort of violates the Stockley document? If it's a very unfair narrowing or specific case for a general motion, that's a fair challenge.
That will go under the undebatable category.
Okay.
Yeah, but remember, and have we all read Stockley 2002? Crucial document. It says that you can challenge if you have narrowed a debate to a single example, but you cannot challenge if you have narrowed a debate to a single argument.
Okay.
Right? There may be many arguments that we can marshal to oppose or propose the motion that we would defend. You know, we value civil liberties over national security. This was the debate that prompted the Stockley document.
I was just going to say, now Aaron gets, because the principal example in that document is Scotland losing.
Right.
But, so there you go.
And that's really what prompted that whole document.
Yes.
Their case was about identity cards, which is one example of that broad principle. Not acceptable. The final that year was defined as this House believes the media has become too powerful, and Ireland focused on one argument out of a potential, any number that they could have cited. That we thought was legitimate. It may not have been ideal, and really you would think that teams can come up with 2 or 3 arguments, but given that that's what the team chose to do, the op had needed to deal with that particular definition. So that is not an illegal definition.
So, so what's the difference then specifically between an argument and an example? So you're saying they narrowed it to an argument. What argument did they narrow it to? Because the definition itself is an argument.
Right. No, well, not necessarily. Definitions, you see, they were talking about media has become too powerful.
Right.
And there could be any number of reasons why, right? Yes. Because it has lots of money, because it has political backing, or whatever.
Okay.
And I forget what Ireland chose to do, but this is an argument, right? But to say the media has become too powerful, and therefore this debate is about whether or not we would impose restrictions on Rupert Murdoch's company.
Okay.
That is a single example, not acceptable. Yeah.
Well.
Hello, Phyllis. Sorry. No worries. Right, so we've got POI's definitional debates. Does that answer the questions about definitions?
Yes.
Okay. Don't be scared of them. They will happen, but I hope for all of you that they don't. Janet, you look like you had a question.
No, I was discussing it with Aaron about how difficult it is to decide if you're debating different things. Who wins? You have to kind of go on. Can you get into that a little further in the definitional debate? Like if you've got 2 different definitions, it's basically 2 different debates going, 2 scripts.
I mean, that's where Irene's color coding comes in.
I mean, it means that you have to be terribly, terribly awake and terribly, terribly clever, which I don't feel most of the time. But sometimes, and I certainly don't do color coding on every debate I judge, but sometimes, remember having an excellent feedback to my kids from Erin O'Brien, who's here at Durham Schools years ago, where she actually had followed the thread of an argument down a page and said she had 3 different colours, and that argument went there and stopped there, and that argument where it went there and stopped there, and that argument where it went there and stopped there, and therefore there was a balance of wrapping up the argument, saying no, actually our side has won on 2 out of 3 of the cases, so she gave it to that team. And one of those little kids then was in last year's team of our lot, and the second one, who was his partner, is here this year. And I reckon it all goes back to Erin's absolutely wonderful feedback when they were tiny at schools tournament years ago.
Unfortunately, Janet, I don't think there's an answer to that one. I just think you have to listen
actively,
and it's hard work. It really is. Which is why we try and give you all breaks at some point, and which is why this group needs to all graduate from being shadow judges to full judges, so everyone can get a bit of a break during the tournament. Yeah.
So technically, I mean, you can have the prop winning the prop definition debate basically, and the op winning the op definition debate basically. You have to find out who won which debate by board. It comes down to points and overall.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Who defended better? Who attacked better?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you go out and you discover that somebody else in the panel put the strength on the other side. Well, that's
they won by more, they won by more.
And then that's what they ask for when they have definitional debates. That is what happens. Yes.
On that definitional sake.
Yeah.
So if for example, an opposition challenges a definition because it's truistic or tautological, and then goes on to even if it, which is kind of funny because if it's truistic, then how do you actually come up with even ifs? Because you can come up with even ifs, then you can just debate the motion. Why don't you just do that?
Also true.
So that's probably really bad strategy on their part because that's a weak challenge.
Yeah.
So do you then prioritize that over the fact? I mean, they might make then better arguments, but it was a very weak challenge. So
yeah, it was. Or they could have made all those arguments opposing the other side
without
the
challenge.
challenge.
They had a debate, but they challenged it at the front, but then went on to have a debate anyway.
And teams should be told that that's not a good strategy.
So that you dock them for strategy,
you
but
would.
That's about where it ends, right? But content and style, everything.
Depends on how well they do the elaboration. Okay. Question here on what do you do with a speaker who doesn't define or doesn't give arguments? Sure, I mean, plenty to say. Shoot them. That was not filmed. It was? Oh, right. Okay.
We were told to.
The way I tend to think about this, right, is I ask myself, have speakers met their roles? And speakers always have roles. It happens a lot in British parliamentary especially, but I think it can be applied to world schools as well. Prop 1 has clear roles. They need to define, they need to give context for the debate, they need to make arguments, and of course they need to flag as well. They need to say what their whole team's arguments are going to be. So they flag arguments and then they make some of the arguments as well. Right? And then Op 1 has roles as well. They need to rebut. They need to introduce their own case. Or bring in their substantive material. And then as we go along, there's all of that. It keeps happening, right? Prop 2 needs to defend its arguments. It needs to attack the new arguments that Op has made. And then they have to introduce new arguments themselves.